Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashrothi, and this is the Eve Universe Show's continued coverage of CSM 16. But actually, before we begin that, I kind of want to discuss some administrative things. The elephant in the room. The thing I don't want my candidate to have to deal with people talking about because it's the thing of the day. And I also want to talk a little bit. So, like today, we have a lot set up. Hopefully, the idea is we're going to be doing 4 of them pretty much back to back at this point. So we're going to do, in fact, as we were going live, one more candidate locked in. So we're going to go Stitch, then Kaneland, then Ron USMC, and then Bruden. And each one of them basically will run into each other with like a little bit, 20, 50, 30 minutes of time to, do whatever. So which means we don't have that much time to cover things. So I will say I want to find time to I really want to do this mining event. I wanted to find time to talk about it. I am very interested in it. But I will say that today, this was kind of my nightmare scenario. I sort of was just hoping that this wasn't true, that A, it would come out this early, and B, exactly this time, not 2 weeks ago and not this weekend, and B, that it would end up being that we didn't have a chance to solve it. But I also still really like the feature because I think that it fixes the fundamental thing that Resource Wars, that was wrong with Resource Wars. So it could potentially be a really good, it could just be the simple enough fix to Resource Wars. It just seems like a lot of pomps and circumstances. And I would have liked CCP of tip me out, behind the scenes ahead of time. Hey, maybe you should stop hyping this up so freaking much. So that way we could all not be so disappointed. I would have happily just cooled my jets about it. But, whatever. I want to believe that part of the problem is that due to the design of the Resource Source sites, it became problematic for us to actually fight over whether or not the gates got made. But obviously there's still a lot going on, and I am still extremely interested in having the Convocation get the gate made. So I've offered up rewards for that, and I've posted that in announcements. And otherwise, I'm going to cover it when I'm not having 4 hours straight, 5, 6 hours. I don't even know what we're about to do. CSM interviews ahead of us. So without further ado, hopefully I can just cite people to begin this video somehow, even though it's live. Shoot, that doesn't really work, but whatever. So we're going to go live and get started with Stitch. You ready, Stitch?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome. And since he just talked, how's my volume? Why don't you say hi, how you doing?
Hi, how you doing?
There you go. Audio's good, everybody? We good? Since I got this behind the scene. Hey, Evie. Awesome. All right. So let's do this again. Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashrothi, and this is the Eve Universe Podcast continued coverage of CSM 16. Interviews, this time with Stitch Kaneland. First of all, how you doing, Stitch?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing very good. It's been a heck of a journey, and we are, I believe, less than halfway through the candidacy, so it's been really good. There's been a lot of good candidates, and I hope that you will be one of them. So without further ado, let's jump into the rules. As always, I have 50 minutes to go over the candidacy. To ask any questions and go over the candidacy with the candidate. I have their post in front of me right here, as well as anything that I may know about the person, which of course, while I don't necessarily know Stitch personally, I believe I've heard, he's rather infamous, and he's of course part of a very storied group, the Tuskers, and so I'm actually going to explore more about him as we talk, but I don't bring much to the table myself. So that's going to be interesting. I have 50 minutes to talk, and then I give him 10 minutes just to make sure that there is nothing else that I forgot to cover. And when we are satisfied, we will send it over to YouTube, and it gets put up on the playlist with all of the others, so that way you can watch them all and make an informed decision about who you want to vote for in the CSM, because the CSM does matter, and it is only as good as the amount that we care about our votes. So, without further ado, Stitch Kaneland. Let's start with, is this your first time running for CSM? What's your history with the CSM?
So this will be the third time that I've run for CSM. Pretty much the same platform, small gang, ship balance, wormholes, low sec, and low sec faction warfare. So yeah, this will be the third time that I've run.
Is that consecutive? So, like, this is the last 2 years as well?
Yeah, consecutively. Yeah.
And how did those previous 2 years go?
The first year was pretty close. I think I got to spot 11 or 12. I was like within 150 votes, if I remember correctly, of getting on. And then last year was pretty competitive. And in that case, I think it was about 600 votes off. So there's a little bit of a gap there. So we'll kind of see how the third year plays out and
Right.
see if things have shifted around. And, we're still pretty competitive this year as well. So
Yeah, so I believe by pretty competitive, you probably meant that, like, so Torvald got elected partially because he had, a large fan base from his streams and all that stuff. So he's kind of one of the dark horses, the surprise successes of the CSM election from last year. But what that meant was, that he kind of brought together the exact coalition of voters that you're looking to now represent, since he is not running this year. Does that pretty much cover it?
yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, and because he had that following, a lot of the votes just went straight to him. They didn't kind of trickle down through the ballots just because he needed those numbers to actually get slotted in.
Right.
So that was kind of another reason there was a dip.
Right, exactly. As I've said this a lot with wormhole candidates, but it's absolutely true with faction warfare LOSIC candidates as well. For the issue is that when there's too many candidates and no one of them kind of unifies the vote enough, and it stays fractured, then the candidates don't have enough number one vote. No one candidate has enough number one votes, and by the time they start getting eliminated and trickling into each other, it's too late. And, like, somebody who would have maybe made it has been eliminated before they would have received, like, a whole bunch of people's number two vote or something like that. So
Right, exactly.
So it's a very important to kind of bring those together. Torvald was a really good example of how he was able to do it. This is your third shot. What is your strategy to be that person that can bring the low sec candidate vote together enough that voting for you gets you as number one, gets you elected, and doesn't further fracture the vote? I can't start talking like this early.
As far as low sec goes, so going back a little bit as far as history, I lived in faction warfare low sec from 2013 to 2015. Well, actually, probably 2016. Because I still stayed in faction warfare even when Citadels were around, which kind of
And just to
crippled the
interject,
whole.
I actually just the other day identified that I thought about it and I identified that exact period of time as the golden age of faction warfare. So I'll ask if you agree with that, but I wanted to pull out that because you mentioned that date and it range, and it's not an accident. That's Inferno to Citadel and just beyond.
Yeah. Yep. You hit it right on the nose. That is the golden age of faction warfare was roughly 2013 to 2015. A little bit. Some say it's like 2012, but again, within that general time frame, that was the golden years, and I have fond memories of those. You could undock pretty much anywhere in faction warfare and get a fight within 5 minutes, no problem. But then after 2015, once Citadels got released, faction warfare started to kind of decline because there's no real incentive to capturing systems if someone could just plop a Citadel down whether they own the system or not. But so going back to your question, as far as unifying low sec and things like that, low sec holds a special place in my heart. Since again, I did live there for faction warfare for 3 or 4 years, and even outside of faction warfare, once faction warfare dried up, I moved on to non-faction warfare low sec, and I lived as a nomad. So I experienced both sides of low sec, both the faction warfare side and the non-faction warfare side, and I also lived as a solo character in faction warfare. Well, in both faction warfare and non-faction warfare. So I got to kind of see, how do you make ISK in low sec? How do you fight in low sec? How do you, explore? Like I did a lot of relic hunting, data site hunting. I would go off into nullsec because I normally would station at a choke point where there's like a nullsec gate, and then lived in low sec. So if I needed to go into nullsec for whatever reason or just wanted to roam, I could do that. So I had a lot of experience kind of figuring out, how low sec worked, as far as a single account character. And I don't know if that's something that anyone's aware of, but I'll mention that now. I only have one account and one character. So I PvP, I do my ratting, I do industry, I very rarely mine unless if I'm really desperate. But I mean, I do everything on this one account. So that kind of gives me a slightly different perspective of everything because I don't rely on alts. So again, going back to the question as far as low sec unifying it, I think I have a really good idea and understanding on both sides of low sec and what those areas need to get more people in them and kind of bring them back to their glory days, like we talked about, those 2013 to 2015 days, because that's a kind of Eve that I want to get back into.
Out of curiosity, what who did you work for when in faction warfare?
So back in faction warfare, I transitioned from faction warfare from nullsec,
Hmm.
and back then I was with a kind of a no-name group, Synthetic Systems. But I went to faction warfare because I wanted to do my own thing. So I joined just the NPC corp. It was what was I can't remember the Minmatar NPC one now.
Oh,
Tribal
tribal
Liberation
liberation.
Force. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay, so you're
So
Mimitar
I
faction warfare. Okay,
correct.
got it.
So I joined them, and I mean, pretty much I hung out in militia chat. Kind of gave pointers to people every once in a while, and just would show up if we needed help somewhere. Not necessarily that I'd go on fleets, but if we were like constantly fighting over a system, like Arzad was a common one, I would show up there and start trying to PvP and capture plexes and things like that. So I was kind of a lone ranger during that time, but I would still contribute to the faction in whatever way I could, while I could still PvP and PvP more casually.
So you left faction warfare because faction the meta game, the higher level game, kind of the engine fell apart, and so you shifted more into piracy. And you would like to see make faction warfare great again. Is that a fair slogan for you, or
Yeah, that's a fair slogan. And just low sec in general. Like when I moved to Nomad, or when I lived as a Nomad and low sec faction, well, low sec in general, I wasn't necessarily being a pirate. Like I rarely went after people ratting. I would actually bait the people that were going after the ratters. So like I would set up at the time I had a Typhoon fleet issue that was PvP fit, that I fit with torpedoes. I would go sit in belts and pretend like I was belt ratting. And then I'd get like, cloaky Tingus or cloaky Produces that would decloak next to me, and then I'd kill them. So I would always be trying to bait the people that were trying to kind of pick on the ratting people. And I never really had much interest in going after ratters because it's just not really a fun fight.
right? And this is actually, I'm glad that you said that, and I'm going to say that I'm going to echo that because this is a safe space. I feel. But one of the things that frustrates me when I talk to some players when it comes to what they feel about balancing, and when they describe PvP, when it occurs to me that their definition of PvP is ganking haulers and mission runners, or sorry, site runners in nullsec, like anom runners. Like, in my opinion, and it sounds like you are of like mind, if the guy doesn't have the capability of shooting back at me, it's not a fight. Is that a fair?
Um, to an extent, yes. Like if like so for example, if you're in like a Loki, like a Cloaky Loki, artillery web, all that stuff, and you're hunting like Ishtars, I mean, like that's not really a fight. Now, the reasoning is that you might be tackling an Ishtar to get an escalation for someone to save the Ishtar, and
True.
then you get a fight out of that, and that's just a normal escalation routine, which I think is fine. But
That's
if your
fair.
sole purpose is to go out and just kill things that realistically don't have a good chance of fighting back, again, it's subjective. It's open to your interpretation of what people want to consider a fight, and that's fine. I'm not going to badger them over that, but my interpretation of a fight is that both players have something to risk. Now, the only exception to that would be like if I was in a frigate, like let's say a Vengeance, like a Vengeance T2 assault frigate, and the only thing I can happen to find is an Ishtar. Well, an Ishtar, even a ratting Ishtar versus a Vengeance, is still a really hard fight because heavy drones will track and blap you pretty easily. So, in that circumstance, because you're punching up, that I would still consider as a fight. But in general, if you're like over shipping something, then yeah, you're probably gonna, I wouldn't really consider that a fight personally.
Right. And I appreciate you giving that nuance. And I guess I could have gotten more detail, but I meant like the idea of like people who legitimately uh, are expecting, like their game is catching somebody who otherwise can't defend themselves, which is fine too. Like that's a totally, like that's great. Whale hunting is awesome, and it does have those secondary pieces to it, and there is those strategies of like taking out infrastructure and making people pain. But don't act like you're an elite PvPer if your ultimate victim is nothing more than a procurer. Like, it's cool, but it's not like, hey, get it compared to. Often this is compared as real PvP in comparison to being in faction warfare, which is somehow not real PvP because we're only in frigates and destroyers. I say to them that shooting each other in frigates and destroyers and plexes is far more real PvP, and that's where the excitement is. And I really regret the fact that faction warfare has kind of fallen out of player favor for whatever reason, because of the value it has in creating the exact kind of fights and the exact kind of scenarios that players seem to so desperately want.
Right, and there's a lot of learning potential in faction warfare too. Like everything I learned in faction warfare, like for example, scram kiting, or learning the ships, resistances, things like that. Those are all things that you need to rely on in other areas of space, whether it's nullsec or wormholes. And you run into this knowledge gap, especially in nullsec, where people rely a lot off of like doctrines, and they expect their doctrine fit to work in like a home defense situation, and it
Right.
doesn't always work like that. And so there's a lot of knowledge in faction warfare and learning potential to I think improve the game as a whole. But again, like going back to what you mentioned, there was one thing you had mentioned where a lot of people think faction warfare is just frigates and destroyers, and yeah, that stigma exists. But like faction warfare, when I played it, I was roaming in battle cruisers and battleships all the time. I would just sit in large plexes and wait for people to come to me. It was an easy way to get fights because you had two options: you get a fight, or you capture the plex and you get LP. So technically, I was getting paid to PvP.
Yep.
So I think that was another really great benefit of factional warfare is you weren't having to dedicate yourself to ratting. Your PvP and your money making were kind of would go hand in hand.
Correct. I often say that faction warfare is one of the only. It is the only real way in the game to consistently make ISK, like PVE, but in a 100% PvP setup, i.e., expected and prepared for PvP, because the sites don't present themselves a real challenge. So you're there as a PvP ship to defend yourself when the danger comes. In every other PvE scenario, there's some component of it that makes it so that like you're either sacrificing your PvE capability or your PvP capability. In faction warfare, the one thing gets the job done, and I really like that.
Right, exactly. I guess the only exception in faction warfare are faction warfare missions, where most of those are running like bombers or jackdaws or something, which are PvE fit and normally extremely hard to catch. But I mean, that's a separate topic. But that's the only gripe I have about faction warfare as a whole component, I suppose, is just the missions.
You know, I really appreciate the fact, and this is not like I really appreciate the fact that I have kind of given simplistic answers in certain things, partially for time, because I know I can get long winded when I get caught up in nuance. But you have given the exact correct like counter nuance to these situations to kind of reinforce the points that I'm missing. I appreciate that. It really shows that you do actually understand faction warfare, possibly, as I do. And we both played it at the same time. We both clearly loved it. So I'll ask the question that I ask so many, and this is actually the original version of it. What is the purpose and value of faction warfare? Knowing that we kind of spoiled a little bit of that answer just now.
Yeah, for me, so from my viewpoint, after going through faction warfare and experiencing it for so many years, and through the heyday and all that stuff, um, my personal view on faction warfare is that it is the ideal area for people to learn to PvP in a cheap manner, but also continue PvPing there if you enjoyed enough at a higher level.
Yep.
Whether that's solo PvP, small gang, even mid scale. You may not necessarily be fighting over, citadels, which I mean, personally, I think that's great. You're going to be fighting over complexes and entire systems to, pull into your control. Um, so you still kind of get that larger fleet experience, maybe not in the size of thousands in tie-dye, but you're more kind of limited to like 100 or 200 people, which I think is a really good number for those larger fights for people to learn and not have to deal with, tie-dye and things like that, and things move a lot more smoother and are just more fast-paced. So again, from my perspective, those are the things that I think are what I feel faction warfare is important. Is it's a very good learning tool. It gets people's foot in the door, so they're not just jumping straight into nullsec, where there's a lot more hazards like bubbles and bombs and big fleet fights and citadels and all that stuff. Just so they can kind of get their feet wet, and if they don't like it, well, I mean, they're normally a few jumps away from high sec. They can go back to high sec, leave faction warfare, and they can continue doing whatever they want to do.
So back when faction warfare was last like significantly rebalanced, back when Han Jagerblitzen was CSM. Do you remember back then?
No,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately not.
So I mean, that was the last time we had a lot of discussion about like what to do, because we were it was Inferno was a pretty significant faction warfare revision, and then there was a secondary patch. So during that time, there was a whole lot of brainstorming about what faction warfare should or shouldn't be, can and cannot be. And that was the time in which the plexes went from being full of rats to the one rat. And even back then, my argument was, and this is why I pointed that whole thing out about the PvP situation, is because the problem was that people were running away, and they're using these incredibly risk averse ships, these no gun incursuses, to basically kite all of the rats, because you didn't have to kill them, you just had to sit on the plex, and when it was done, you just left, and if anybody came in, you just left, or you just lost your incursus that was 2 million and you didn't care and you just went again. And the problem was that nobody would like actually quote unquote run the sites, and I argued that the reason why is because you required like a reasonable PvE like setup in order to do that. In a PvP scenario, people aren't going to do that. If they can, you can only be set up for one or the other. And ultimately, the solution was, as you see now, basically the PvE component of it was reduced down to effectively a DPS check, right? So,
Hmm.
uh, one of the pieces of this, though, was that during these discussions, there was a strong contingent of people who argued that they didn't want PvE to interfere with their PvP, right? Like there was arguments about like the rats couldn't be strong. They couldn't be like if a rat spawned in and scrammed, some people like to argue that that would be a really good thing for there to be scrams in there. But people said that if like a rat spawned, a PvE rat spawned, and then scrammed somebody and changed the course of the fight, that would somehow taint the sacred PvP that was undergoing with their PvE-ness. But I think that a lot of things have changed since then. And I remember a faction warfare roundtable a couple years ago, and the thing that I got out of it was just the sheer number of faction warfare members who were interested in cosmetic rewards, interested in lore justifications, and interested in just in being engaged with the empires and being told like whatever. Likewise, both Kybernauts and Edencom both feel like they would have been far more rewarded if they felt more engaged by their principal factions, and also in the Amar Mimitar war zone for the last year to 2 years, I think is a really good example of just a little bit of play with CCP Delegate Zero and some of other CCP invested with those engaged with that play, like the conflict over Flossiswin, has really kept that side of the war zone engaged when the Caldari Galente war zone has kind of just decayed into cynicism. I know that was a lot, and so I'm just going to hand it all over to you and let you just pontificate on any of that. What do you
So
think of, or
regarding
with the
the
question of
interaction,
what do you think of the role of lore with that involved with faction warfare as kind of an overarching question? Sorry, my bad.
that's fine. Um, so I don't have any opposition to lore and faction warfare. I mean, it would definitely add a lot more to interacting with it. Because there was an interesting thing in faction warfare that I noticed when I first started, and that was that you were given ranks. I was like, oh, cool. What happens when you get to the max rank, which for Minmatar was general? Which it was pretty funny because at the time I think we were at tier 5 for Minmatar, um, uh, the tiers for faction warfare, and so you're getting like I was getting like I don't know like 80,000 LP for every large complex, or no, it was 125,000 LP for every large complex. But then like faction warfare missions were paying out a ton,
Mm.
and so I would go through and do a couple of those, and then all of a sudden, like probably within a week, I got to that general rank, which was the maximum rank, and I'm just like, okay, well, cool. What happens now? And nothing really happened.
Yeah.
So I like if they could have tied something into the ranks with like a little blurb for like lore reasons, like oh, you've made it to sergeant, or you've made it to major, or you're general now, you get a special award, or get more lore detail on like the Minmatar military or something like that, or who your primary commanders are. Any kind of little interaction like that would have been at least something you got out of it, instead of just, hey, look, you're a general now, but it means nothing.
You,
So that's I would definitely I agree, like there should be a little bit more there, to kind of fill out that lore aspect of faction warfare, um, to go along with the narrative of faction warfare, where you're fighting other empires, like what's going on in the back end, what's happening as we push this line, or capture these systems, what's happening within these systems when they're being captured, things like that would be interesting.
yeah. So they're actually those medals are or those ranks I believe are publicly displayable, like almost like a medal. So that way there is a bit of that, and I do know at least a few people that at least brag slash talk about their medals, if not are proud of or whatever you want to say about it. But I agree that it would be cool if it was more in your face. Again, I think historically, like the player base were against things like cosmetic, like titles or something like that being added into the game for achievements. But I really think that represented the player base's zeitgeist in the before times, in the long, long ago. And I think that in a lot of ways, people have changed in that regard, and perhaps people respect those kinds of rewards as long as they are also lumped with other kinds of rewards and part of it. But they, those kinds of tokens end up being, you know, respected by those who receive them, at least sometimes. But so we agree that faction warfare needs to be great again. Um,
Right, definitely.
CCP seems to agree that faction warfare needs to be great again. Foundations, if not alludes to, but kind of points towards that faction warfare kind of revamp is either in the docket or at least like coming shortly thereafter. It would seem. So that would put you right to be the CSM candidate to help navigate that. Torvald put in a lot of work last year, is setting down the foundations of knowledge of the need for faction warfare balance and what the problems are. How would you help CCP? How would you, being elected to the CSM, help CCP, you specifically, help CCP navigate this process?
So navigating the faction warfare issues, again, since I went through it for many years, I'm familiar with mechanics and kind of the lesser known nuance of certain issues in faction warfare. Ignoring the big elephant in the room like the just citadels in general, but you also have other issues that people may or may not talk about, and also to try to push that main point that faction warfare is a PvP area, but it's also a learning area. So I think that would be kind of the foundation of how we want to look at faction warfare, is that this is a place to PvP. It's also a place to learn, and we want to try and foster that mentality. We don't want to muddy it up with a bunch of PvE mechanics that kind of take away from the actual objective of that area of space. Not to say that there can't be PvE there. It's just like, you know, I don't want faction warfare missions to be the primary point of pushing systems or making money within that environment. It should fall more down to the PvP players and capturing plexes and things like that.
It's interesting that you say that because like this idea, and I was of this mentality too, right? If I was having to describe faction warfare, I would have described it as a territory combat gameplay with a secondary mission reward system tacked on. But CCP recently released a video like about missions, and it in it they describe it as mission running with a territory warfare component, and I was just like that. First of all, I had never ever heard it described that way up until that point, and second of all, it suddenly made me immediately aware of why there has been such a disconnect between what CCP does about faction warfare and what players do about faction warfare. The players are colluding with each other to remove the missions from the game, and CCP is putting in their videos that it's about mission running, and the territory component makes it interesting. Do you know, like, what do you did you respond to that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I do remember when factional warfare banded together and made the agreement, no mission running essentially, or they were killing other mission runners of their own, to really stop that flow of LP and kind of show, this is what we actually want. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a disconnect for sure. If that's kind of what they're thinking, but I mean, again, unfortunately with CCP, when they release things like this, they're kind of just giving us vague information,
Yeah.
and they may describe it as that, but the end result is something completely different. So that's kind of the one thing I would hesitate on to determine, is this actually what we're going to get, or is it going to be something a little bit different?
Right. Also, the other thing is that like as a designer, they do see it slightly different than us or whatever, right? So, um, as they're building their design goals and we're building our design goals, you may find that they have ideas or plans for things, or they think of it in a different slice of way than we do, right? Like, we feel this way about missions because missions provide LP but do not affect the war zone. And therefore, it to those of us who do fight for the war zone and do keep those missions available and worthwhile for those mission runners, feel like they are devaluing the payment for our effort while not actually contributing to that effort themselves, which at the very least generates bad blood. So it may not be like there may be a third solution, and I think that that's the point, is that we really, really, really need a knowledgeable, competent, non-reactionary faction warfare person that came from that era, that knows why that was great, and can help CCP, like help bridge the gap of knowledge or understanding from us, those who can only see forest for the trees for the forest, and them, those who can only see forest for trees. And that's why this is, like, in particular, I am looking for a strong faction warfare candidate, and that's why I wanted to drill into this with you so deeply. I wanted to give you one more chance to respond to that, and then we'll move on to the next topic, because I don't want this to just be about faction warfare, because I think that that's not just what you're about.
Yeah, for sure. So let me. I had something I was going to touch on there real second. All of a sudden, it left my brain.
Oh, you're just trying to make me feel good. It happens to me all the time.
So regarding like missions and things like that, like I know that this has happened in the past, where at one point faction warfare was about you could gain a lot of LP by killing people, but then people were abusing that, so they took it out. I would like to try and see a way to rework missions to kind of go back towards that, but not it be something where you just kill someone. It's you have missions to do certain objectives that are PvP related,
Right.
and not necessarily only PvP. Like I think there should still be some element of PvE in faction warfare, just because there are some people that just enjoy that, and that's fine. But again, it should be built primarily around PvP and PvP rewards and getting people out there and actually, doing PvP, because that's what that area space is for. And that was one thing. Another thing too that I wanted to bring up is, CCP released Abyssals, so they released Abyssal Arenas. I mean, the original Abyssal Arena was faction warfare. It was the same kind of content. If you wanted quick fights that were easily accessible, you went to faction warfare. Like we're kind of circling around this mechanic that's already in the game, and trying to put it into other areas of the game, when it's just like, we can just focus on faction warfare and we get everything back that most of us wanted.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't think I am going to be able to move on at this point right now. So, because I do want to respond to that too. Like, this is a really important thing. Like, I've said it for years, as faction warfare lives, low-sec lives. As faction warfare dies, low-sec dies. Having people out there that care, like that. That's like, it's like the first growth of the forest, right? If you have people out there that are trying to take territory, then that gives somebody who's out looking for a fight a way to go get a fight, which makes it so that those who want to go get a fight can also hunt those who are out getting a fight. And suddenly there's a reason to be in low-sec. But if you don't have those guys that have a reason to be out there, also ready to fight, that are being paid to fight in frigates and decies, as well as battleships and cruisers and all that sort of stuff, that's what lets faction warfare, or that's why faction warfare space is so much more livelier than other areas of low-sec. And faction warfare gives a lot of protections. Some people say like snuff or whatever is the thing killing Valente Caldari faction warfare, but ironically enough, capitals have very, very little to do with warzone control. The warzone control system is designed to resist that. So I think that the solution is elsewhere. But the solution that I've often suggested is very similar to what you said, but what I call campaigns. 2 week or so spans where it's like a specific constellation becomes the focus, and then afterwards, like the results are like reported on, and rewards are doled out based on winner or loser of that set period of time, and then like it resets, and then the next campaign goes. I think that the details are less important. I think that the main goal here is to give people direction, and more importantly, focus attention to specific and different places, because we all remember how awesome sieges were, and we're just trying to like recapture that magic in a bottle. Back to you.
Right, exactly. And like you said, the campaign, that whatever that all may entail, we don't have to get into the details, but I mean, it, something that's going to cause changes that are, frequent. Because personally, like in my opinion, Eve flourishes and it shows its best when there are changes happening. Not necessarily they have to be major changes, but just changes in general. Um, and because that causes things to shift in the meta, that causes people to think of different ways to fit ships that may not have been useful a year ago are now really useful now because something changed in the meta. And I think that's just really important as a mechanic to see those changes. But you could have that campaign theory. They could even make it where you have battle lines where adjacent systems that are controlled by different factions. You earn more LP in those systems than systems that are in some dead end backwater system that they can AFK in. Those are all things that we can incorporate to just make it a lot more exciting and fun to be in that area of space.
Right. And the issue with us trying to create the details of this as players is that a lot of the design decisions that will go into whatever the ultimate solution will be will have a lot to do with like UI development resources, art development resources, other things like that. So you as a CSM member may be privy to what level of commitment they might have to it and be able to help them get the most out of that level of commitment. But out on the outside, without that NDA, all of us are just in the peanut gallery telling them, make it better, which doesn't do anybody any good. So, yeah, again, like I appreciate you letting me pontificate so much and going back and forth on this particular topic so much. It is, finding a good faction warfare candidate is one of my top priorities as, a CSM interviewer. So I'm pretty satisfied with what I've heard. I think we can move on. Ready?
Sounds good. Yep.
All right. So I'm showing here that you say that your proof of your knowledge, and you give all of these different examples: Battlecruiser, roll bonus rebalance, battleship, ship resolution buffs with links. I first of all, are you suggesting here that these are like you worked with CCP and got these done? Do you have evidence that like these were suggestion, or is it like this is my idea from 2 years before, and then they implemented basically that solution? Like how proof is this, as it were?
So that's kind of a good question because that's something I've brought up in uh, my CSM posts and previous CSM posts. Is I think the way that I look at it is we'll start off with the first part here is that these are things that I've put out over the years. As you can kind of see there, it's from 2015 to current, of just things that I notice as I'm playing the game, things that I think are imbalanced or could use improvements for whatever reason. I normally try to base it around logic and not emotions. So those are the initial point of hey, this is what I think should improve. These are the reasons why, etc. So we'll start with like the Battlecruiser roll bonus that happened in 2015. Back then, Battlecruisers did not have range bonuses. On the old Eve forums, I recommended Battlecruisers should get the same range bonuses as T1 destroyers because they're meant to be anti-cruiser, but they can't do that because they're slow.
Hmm.
That got a lot of traction on the forums where a lot of people upvoted that. There's a ton of discussion. I think it was like 50 plus pages of discussion. And after 8 months or so, CCP released pretty much exactly what was recommended in that forum post. So now that goes to the second part of, do I claim these as things that I've done? Um, Personally, I can't say with certainty. I would look at it more as either I helped CCP with this idea and they ran with it, or CCP already had this idea and my thoughts are already on the same page as CCP. So as
Right.
far as like a CSM point or discussion goes, if I'm kind of already on the same mindset as CCP, then I kind of already fit in with those discussions, and I think we're kind of on the same page if it comes to that. If I came up with these ideas and CCP ran with them, then again, kind of the same thing. If I'm on the CSM, then I can help provide these ideas that have already been implemented in the game that, for the most part, have been favorable.
Yeah, totally. And great. That's actually a really good answer. So it sounds to me like you're closer to like the Rix Javix strong advocate for warp core stabilizers side of things, as opposed to like focus group T3 cruiser balance change, alumni side of the group. Is that accurate?
Uh,
Uh-oh, did I lose you?
with Rick's and as far as like what he recommended, but is it kind of a similar thing where he recommended changes to warp core stabs and they finally came out?
Yeah, like he was I mean, that wasn't the only thing, but like just the idea of like or better yet, stain guy, more a non not a person who's running for CSM, so that's a good neutral, who I think is now going to be biomassing his character because for years he's been advocating for a change and now it's finally happened. So it's not like he coordinated with CCP. Clearly he didn't, but no one will ever doubt that that low set gate to Stain is there because Stain guy promoted it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I would say I'd probably fall more on that side of things. Just making recommendations and eventually potentially CCP ran with them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. The reason why I ask is not to try to get you to like take credit for something that you're not comfortable with. My point was more that throughout the years, CCP has had things like focus groups, and I've spoken with CCP at gatherings, and like spoken with developers directly about these changes and advocated for them and that sort of stuff. And I know a lot of other people had. So I was just wondering whether or not this was anything like that, because you have had a long and storied history. Um, if you, but it sounds like you're just like everybody else and rah-rah-rahing things that end up being seen as good ideas. In other words, you have good ideas, and eventually CCP agrees with you. Is pretty much what I'm seeing.
Right, right. And some of those ideas that like are there, I've mentioned several times, like the battleship scan resolution buff. Like, I think I pestered CCP about that several times, at least made posts about it, and again, kind of put in all my logic as to why is the Roke locking slower than the Naglfar, for example.
So,
So eventually that got fixed, and now we're good.
so what's something that's not on this list yet?
Uh, well, right now it's actually kind of funny. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately actually goes back to kind of one of the things on the list, but it's a change mainly to battle cruisers. It ran that roll bonus that I mentioned a long time ago, but I don't know if you want me to go into it too deeply. But um, essentially, it's making battle cruisers competitive with hacks again. Because, long story short, the battlecruiser roll bonus or range bonus is always going to be less effective than the hack range bonus. So how is a slower
Right.
ship going to project the same as a hack with a lower range bonus? Because again, battlecruisers should technically be anti-cruiser, but they can't project as far as a hack, just out the door because of the way the range bonuses are set up.
See, and I think that this is why I like the way that you talk about these things and why you have such a long history of arguing in behalf of things that end up being implemented and successful later on, which is that you're not just like you look at things comparatorily, right? Like it's design. It's this is true and it shouldn't be true. And I think that we can all agree with that. And then at that point, it's just a discussion of how you can no longer make it true, right? Like it is true that this one ship can lock the lock range difference that you mentioned. I'm not going to try to get which one you said, right? But or like in this case, it's true that hacks can shoot further than a battlecruiser, and therefore that breaks the design in this way. So, however we're going to fix it, that's fine. But this is true, and the thing is that like that's there's a lot of things like that in Eve, and if you look at it in that way, look at for like almost like the violations. I feel like that's a better way to help navigate design than just like there's too many munins because So I guess I'll just hand that back over to you. Yeah, I seem to be doing that a lot. I'm sorry I'm not having questions, but like you're just triggering me to think about like the design stuff and then like getting your reactions.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people look at me as like the small gang solo guy, um, and they get this notion that all my changes are about buffing solo or buffing small gang, and that's not really how I do a lot of my balancing, or my posts about balance. If when we look at all the things that I've made posts about, the majority of them are not in any way related to solo or small gang. They're just general ecosystem changes. So like the Battlecruiser roll bonus, that helps everyone because back in 2015 and before, Battlecruisers were like they were garbage. No one wanted to use them because they had no range. They would just get kited by everything except for the Ferox because the Ferox was the only one with the range bonus.
Wait, when was this?
The Battlecruiser changes
No,
was 2015.
Yeah. Okay, so hurricanes. Got it.
Right, hurricanes and Brutixes and all that stuff. So, um, they and CCP added all the range bonuses, and they pretty much added them exactly how I stated. Where missile ships got a missile range bonus, drones got a velocity drone bonus, and then the turret ships got a optimal or fall off bonus, whatever the case was. Actually, my original goal was that it would be a 50% optimal or 50% fall off depending on the race, but CCP did a split 25-25. But yeah,
Question about
again,
that,
all
real
my
quick. Real
all of
quick.
my balances. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
real quick question about that before we go on about that. So before this happened, now destroyers are like advanced or like bigger frigates. Battle cruisers are like bigger cruisers. Destroyers already have like better range than frigates as like a general rule. Before this, battle cruisers did not. Did destroyers back then? Did you advocate for both, or was the destroyer part of your advocacy, or like how does that play into it?
So the destroyers were actually the whole basis as
Right.
to
Okay.
why I
Good.
felt battle cruisers should have gotten the range bonus
Good.
because
Got it.
this.
Got it. I'm with you.
Yeah, because destroyers already had they were anti-frigate and they were slow, so battle cruisers again should kind of get the same thing. They're anti-cruiser, but they're slower than cruiser, so they should have more range, or at least the same range. And that's the same thing you see with assault frigates and T1 destroyers. They all have the exact same range bonuses. Like a cormorant has the same weapon range as a harpy. The main differences between them is their lock range. So T1 destroyers generally have lower lock range than assault frigates. And that's the same thing we see with heavy assault cruisers compared to T1 battle cruisers. Heavy assault cruisers have more targeting range and they have the same full range bonuses, but battle cruisers are only getting the split range bonus except for the Ferox. The Ferox is the one that's unique where it actually has a it's not as high as the Eagle, but it's like 1.5 times of what you would expect a typical battlecruiser range to be. But all the other battlecruisers kind of fall in the same category of we have a range bonus, but it's not really good enough to compete with hacks. So you run into this discrepancy where if you were to pit a group of 720 Hurricanes versus 720 Munins, the Munins are going to mop the floor with them because the Hurricanes can't project the same way a Munin can because they don't get the same range bonus.
Excellent demonstration of both your knowledge of the mechanics and your ability to describe and debate the point. Okay, so I am at my time, and unfortunately, today is going to be a tight enough schedule that I can't really be too flexible with that. But I do want to give you kind of one curveball prompt as I hand it over to your time, which is that I mentioned him earlier, so I'm going to give you fair time to address it directly. Rix Javix is also running for CSM this year. He is basically running very similar argument to you, right? A pirate that knows faction warfare and so wants to represent them in order to make it better. Rix Javix is arguably more popular because of his, his whole Evo Ganda shtick and all that stuff. With the concern in mind that if we are going to be voting for a faction warfare candidate, our number one vote is the most important vote to keep our favored candidate alive. Why should you be the faction warfare candidate that gets the number one first?
I'm still here. I'm just giving it
Sure.
a thought here.
You have like 9 minutes and 30 seconds. Take your time. I like people taking their time to think it out.
So I kind of echo what I've mentioned in the past. For one, this may go against other people, and that's fine. But for me, I experience Eve a little bit differently than probably every other candidate because I am a single character solo account. So some people might say, well, that limits my view, but I think it gives me a better view of the raw interactions of the game because I'm not relying on alts. I'm not relying on, cloaky eyes or whatever. Um, I'm just experiencing the game, kind of how I think maybe originally, maybe not right now anymore, but originally the devs intended. Um, so you learn a lot of things solo, small gang. I've been through nullsec, I've been through lowsec, I've been through both faction warfare, non-faction warfare, and now I live in wormholes. So I've experienced lots of areas of the game and how they interact with each other, and some of the mechanics they already have, and some of the ways that CCP has coded those mechanics. And I'm not a coder, but I'm at least familiar with how those things interact with each other. So I can draw that knowledge from different areas of the game into faction warfare to say, if this will work, if this is a good alternative for changes. Do we want to incorporate something from this area of space that would be beneficial to faction warfare lowsec that is easy for CCP to code because they already have it, instead of trying to create something new and from the ground up, which you know historically CCP generally doesn't do that a whole lot, or if they do, it takes a lot of time, and sometimes it's rushed. So again, from that perspective, because I am in a unique position as far as how I play the game, I think that gives me a lot more perspective on the game and how things interact with each other.
That's a really good answer. Thank you. Um, okay, so but you do have a few more minutes just in case. Is there anything that I didn't get to because I consumed it all with faction warfare? I don't want to make you seem like that is all your candidacy is.
Well, I mean, I have wormholes, so I'll touch on that real quick, which I have this in my CSM post as well. Just outright say it. I'm running for, or I'm adding wormholes to my list of things because, for one, I live in wormholes, but for two, because the wormhole community has a tendency to fracture their votes. So
Yeah.
what happens is you have the big groups like Hard Knocks or Laserhawks and all them where they want to have their own candidate put in, and all that ends up happening is everyone kind of votes for their own person, and then no one gets in on the wormhole side. So I'm pretty active in the wormhole community, like on the Discord servers and things like that. I talk a lot with them. If there's something I don't know, I ask them about it. So I'm mainly acting as a neutral entity for wormholes, saying, "Hey, I can be your middleman. I don't have any bias. I'm not trying to evict anyone. I just kind of live here, and I roam out of them." So that's the purpose of why I'm on wormholes. I don't know everything there is to know about wormholes. I don't live in high class, which is the area where everyone rats and makes all those big dollar bills. But I'm familiar with the mechanics, and I'm also familiar with the fact that even though they can make a lot of money in those high class holes, they're not necessarily 100% safe. And I've caught plenty of people in those high class holes doing things like I just killed a Rourke uh, 2 weeks ago that was worth like 8.5 billion. So yeah, people lose expensive things in wormholes doing things to make them ISK. It happens. They're not perfectly safe. Um, so again, I wanted to bring that up as far as wormholes go. And again, solo, small gang, ship ecosystem balance. I do those things, but I'm primarily looking at everything as the big picture. I'm not trying to nerf nullsec or buff small gang or whatever the case may be. I am mainly just looking for things that just don't sit right from a balance perspective, and because of the knowledge I have and the areas I've experienced, I think I'm in a good position to present those to CCP and say, can we improve this? Can it be changed? Or if you're going to change this, while I'm there, I can provide that input to hopefully make it a better change in the long run.
Right. So you were in faction warfare before, during the Golden Age. You left because things kind of fell apart. It is my personal belief, and I think that you kind of agree, at least, that the biggest thing that faction warfare is missing, regardless of whatever, is people that really care about the war zone control and making it happen, because that's what drives the conflict. So, with that in mind, will you rejoin faction warfare if you're elected to the CSM, so that way you can be an active participant in making faction warfare great again?
It's funny because I've been thinking about that lately, not just because of the CSM, just because I kind of want to change my surroundings, but I have been looking into moving back to LoSec in general, whether that's faction warfare or non-faction warfare. I haven't decided yet. Um, I'm just mainly looking for content, and if it happens to kind of line up with changes of faction warfare, that'd be great because that's in the end that's kind of where I want to go back to. I want to go back to those years of 2013 to 2015 when I could just get fights every single day instead of getting fights every 3 or 4 days because there's just no one out in space right now.
Right. Awesome. Well, in conclusion, I want to throw out there, I just want to update, just in case people are relatively new. One of the reasons why faction warfare is in a state that it is right now is because since Citadels, for a long time, everyone knew that there was an issue. There was even an initiative within CCP to fix the issue. But ultimately, the design issues that have spurned from things like structures have kind of more or less functioned as wedge issues that has prevented CCP from being able to make any progress whatsoever on faction warfare, to the point where I remember back in like 2016, 2017, when we were really pushing for the next iteration of faction warfare, we actually got back from the summit or the FanFest that there is nothing coming to faction warfare for at least another year. Like, that was the kind of news that we got. So yeah, and then within the last year or two, we have seen some changes to the fixes to those old mechanical changes that were asked for before. And also like a reinstatement of plex sliding, and they at least did iterate on structures to help reduce their impact on warzone control and whatnot. But they've still never done anything to really reignite the war. And as long as there isn't groups on both sides of the war zone that really give a crap, like we see on the Amar Mimitar side, then it will always remain just like this cynical method for people to farm ISK by, flipping the sides or, whatever else. It's when you have people that really care about the war zone that makes the whole system work and prevents those other forces from having control over things. Which means now that CCP has indicated that faction warfare is interesting, now that Torvald put in his work last year and has really upped the perception of faction warfare in CCP, and I think regardless of whether Torvald or other people, I think that there's a lot more attention and general feeling that faction warfare, it is time for a faction warfare rebalance. And there's lots of indications that that is what's happening. And so of all of the things all of the reasons to choose your candidate if you are interested in that kind of new bro focused small gang, you know, uh, PvP while getting paid, privateer for the empires kind of gameplay. We need a representative, and you know what? Stitch came from that time that in which it was the best, and so if he could sit at that table and remind everybody of what made everything so good back when everybody said that faction warfare wasn't fun or nobody did it and we were having the time of our lives, but Null Blocks didn't want anybody to talk about it. You know, the guy that can sit there at the table and tell everybody what it was like, maybe we'll get a good faction warfare. So I wish you the best of luck, dude.
Thanks. Yeah, it'd be I definitely agree. I'd love to be able to sit in and try to get it steered in the right direction because I think we're, again, we don't know the changes yet, but I think we're getting close, and it's just primarily Citadels are I think are the main thing holding us back right now. I mean, there's a little things here and there that definitely need to be addressed, but Citadels are the ones that need to be taken down or figured out before we can move forward.
And also, unfortunately, because I did dig so much into that topic and I can't really expand my time, there are some other questions about your wormhole stuff and other things. Please go check out his campaign thread and post your questions there. He'll respond to you and whatnot.
Yep, for sure.
I do appreciate it, and I sincerely do wish you the best of luck and hope that you do well because you'd be good up there. 07.
Thank you.